So, I finished another book. I really need to read faster, don't I? Anyways, I finished The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I listen to a lot of my books on Audible. The one I listened to was read by Russell Tovey. Tovey. He does a really good job. He has a different voice for every character, and there's like 20 characters in the book, and he makes sure to give every person a different sound, different voice. It's very fun to listen to. It's not quite a there's a couple that I've listened to, like Treasure Island was a performance. It was like a whole performance. So they had different voice actors for different characters, and there wasn't much descriptions of what the characters felt. Instead, the actors would put emotion into their voice, and they'd yell at each other, they'd cry, that kind of thing. So it was a performance. This one's not quite a performance. This one's still a narration of the book. But he does a really good job. He puts a ton of emotion into all the characters that he reads and plays. I think he did fantastic. I would give this. I mean, it's the only Dorian Gray that I've listened to, but I would still give the guy a recommendation because he did fantastic. Anyways, so I finished the book on my way back from Christmas. And I'll give you a summary of it. But I want to. So I'm familiar with Dorian Gray from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That was a movie with Sean Connery. It's really bad. Would not recommend it. It's really, really bad. But in that movie, Dorian Gray uses the painting to basically have immortality. And when he's fighting and stuff, if he gets stabbed and stuff, he can just shrug it off. I'm happy to say that is not the case in the book. It is much more nuanced and carefully thought out. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that the book was not all about punching and kicking. Anyways, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the book. The book focuses on the reflection of it's Wikipedia calls it a philosophical novel. I think that's just a fancy word of saying that there's a good message to it. So it focuses on the reflection of our actions as portrayed by our appearance, and how heavy things, heavy actions, heavy choices, like this is not something that most people do, but let's say making of choice, the trolley problem, right? Pulling the lever, that's going to weigh heavily on you. If you're going to pull the lever to save the one, no, if you're going to pull the, what is it? I'm scatterbrained, so let's lay this out. So the trolley problem is there's a train coming and it's going to kill 5 people, but you can pull a lever and redirect the track. It's only going to kill 1 person, right? And depending on what you choose, regardless of what you choose, that choice is going to weigh heavily onto your person, and it will manifest itself. Maybe you'll frown more, and you'll get those frown lines around your chin. Maybe it'll... Oh, thank you. Thank you, neighbors. Maybe it'll cause your eyes to sink back into your head a little bit. Darken the sockets around your eyes. But the book, this picture of Dorian Gray, was painted by, where I want to get this right. Basil Hallward is the artist who paints Dorian, our main character. And he does he puts so much of himself. He puts his soul into it. Or he doesn't put his own soul into it. He captures the essence of Dorian's soul, and he puts it into the painting, completely unintentional. Unintentionally? Whatever. It's good though. So, Dorian can be considered to be the peak of innocence. He can be he is representative of an untarnished man, without knowledge of the cruelty, or without experience of the cruelty of the world, of poverty, of disease, of con men, of deception, of death. He is innocent and pure. And boyish, even. They use that to describe him a lot. He's boyish. And while he's sitting for his painting, as Basil is painting Dorian, we're introduced to Lord Henry Wotton. And he is the devil on your shoulder. He's that little voice. It's always telling you, making observations of the evil around the world and trying to rationalize it in a self-serving and insidious way. I want to read you some of the quotes that this Henry has. And Dorian becomes absolutely infatuated with Henry. He believes him to do no wrong, and he believes him to be always right. But a lot of his quotes, or a lot of his opinions on life, can be fairly skewed. I want to read you a couple. People say sometimes that beauty is only superficial. That may be so, but at least it is not so superficial as thought is. To me, beauty is the wonder of wonders. It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. It's such a curious and almost backwards way of thinking, especially, here's another one. Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul. The books that the world calls immoral are books that show the world its own shame. See, that one's actually pretty good. I like that one. But what's the saying? A broken clock is right twice a day. Here's one. This one's good. I make a great difference between people. I choose my friends for their good looks, my acquaintances for their good characters, and my enemies for their good intellects. A man cannot be too careful in the choice of his enemies. I have not got one who is a fool. They were all men of some intellectual power, and consequently, they all appreciate me. Is that very vain of me? I think it's rather vain. What a curious way of approaching life. And of course, he's a lord, so he has a very large golden parachute of both societal both financial stability and societal stability, which the author subtly, but definitely makes sure is understood. Modern morality consists in accepting the standard of one's age. I consider that for any man of culture to accept the standard of his age is a form of the grossest immorality. I know, now, that when one loses one's good looks, whatever they may be, one loses everything. Your picture has taught me that. Lord Henry Wotton is perfectly right. Youth is the only thing worth having. When I find that I am growing old, I shall kill myself. I like persons better than principles, and I like persons with no principles better than anything else in the world. Anyways, those are just a couple bits. It's curious, I think. Henry's very sure of himself. Vain and almost, definitely egotistical. Not only has he convinced Dorian that he's always right, and almost that his word is law, but he has convinced himself that that is the case. And he has a slick tongue. Now he has a silver tongue. He's able to not only talk himself, he's able to talk himself out of almost any situation and convince himself that he's doing right as well, which is a most powerful ability. Every time Henry is in scene in the book, you can just feel him very slightly pulling and tugging on Dorian to drag him further down into vanity and hedonism, immorality. And he does it so carefully. Oscar Wilde does such a good job at this. He does it so carefully, so subtly, that in bits and pieces, you might even agree with Henry. Or even on the specific topic, you might agree with Henry. But Henry's able to deflect by, if he's ever confronted, he's able to deflect and either apply what he's just said broadly, so it's difficult to pin down, or vice versa, apply to a very specific instance, so which again, that's very hard to pin down. And Dorian falls for it, hook, line, and sinker. And I would get back to the painting, because the painting is the perfection. It's that innocent, that boyish youth that's been captured. And Dorian makes the wish. He wishes that the painting may age, and he remain young forever. And so every act, every crime that he commits upon his very soul gets deflected off of himself and is illustrated in the painting. His first sin, his first big sin is he's also, I don't think, is he a lord? I'm not exactly sure. Doesn't really matter. He's of high society. And because of this, he gets a lot of leeway and privileges. So he goes to an opera house, and as he's watching, this is one in the slums, just an awful opera house with terrible actors, but there's one, the Sybil Vane. She's beautiful, and she's the best actress he's ever seen. And he falls in love with her. Or rather, how I see it is he falls in love with the idea of her. He sees her playing characters, Helen of Troy, Juliet, whatever. And he's absolutely in love with how she portrays these characters. And he talks to her afterwards, and he courts her, and she's receptive to it, and he's very genuine, he's very honest, he's very, he tries to stay true to his feelings, but his feelings themselves are skewed. And he gives what he believes to be true love to Sybil Vane, and she reciprocates that. But it starts to show in her acting. Now that she can see that this true love between her and Dorian, and she believes to be true and honest, she starts to lose that touch with her acting, because she's been putting in everything she has into that acting, and now that she has the idea of love with Dorian instead of the idea of love as her acting suffers. And Dorian is crushed by this. It's because he didn't love Sybil Vane. He loved what she represented. She represented the perfection of acting, of this skill that she's developed. And of course, she's beautiful. The book describes her being absolutely gorgeous. But after one night, where he brings his friends, Henry and Basil, and she doesn't perform as well, he confronts her, and he basically says, "We're done." And she kills herself because of this. And when Dorian finds out, at first he's a little devastated, a little sad. And Henry's the first to confront him, or to offer condolences and stuff, because they were to be wed. And he convinces Dorian to stay away, not get involved, as it is unbecoming of a man of his class. And Dorian is convinced that through Henry's so poisonous, he commends Dorian on the scandal, but he says you did it when you were too young, basically. Scandals are exciting, but you should be careful when to do them and to keep yourself protected. I don't know, it's hard to describe, and I can't find a quote at the moment. But Dorian is convinced that he'll be fine. And when he visits the painting of himself, he sees in the mouth there's a new crease of cruelty, almost, of what he did to Sybil Vane, how he was the catalyst to her death. And he's not too sure how to feel, but he knows that he doesn't want anybody to see it, so he takes it up and locks it in the tower of his house, where only he can access it. That was his first sin, is the death of Sybil Vane. I'm going to mention here that she had a brother. That's important for later. And then the book jumps forward in time, and there's an explanation of how Dorian, how these acts that he's been doing, about these evils that he does, these evils that he, what's the word? Inflicts on the people around him. None of it reflects directly onto him. It all goes into the painting. And I want to read you Dorian Gray painting description. Here we go. I think this is it. Yes. Yes. So the media that I'm familiar with for this story is that if Dorian were to look upon the portrait, he would transfer all of his age back into him and they would switch. Not the case, not the case. In fact, Dorian took pleasure in going up and looking at the evils of his soul and then placing a mirror next to it and looking at the youth and the innocence of his own face. What a sick and twisted pleasure that is. And he enjoys adding to the grotesque photo or the grotesque painting of himself. I want to read you a bit here. Often on returning home from one of those mysterious and prolonged absences that gave rise to such strained conjecture among those who were his friends, or thought they were so, he himself would creep upstairs into the locked room, open the door with his key that never left him now, and stand with a mirror in front of the portrait that Basil Hallward had painted of him, looking now at the evil and aging face on the canvas, and now at the fair young face that laughed back at him from the polished glass. The very sharpness of the contrast used to quicken his sense of pleasure. He grew more and more enamored with his beauty, more and more interested in the corruption of his own soul. He would examine with miniature care, and sometimes with a monstrous and terrible delight, the hideous lines that searched the wrinkling forehead or crawled round the heavy sensual mouth, wondering sometimes which were the more horrible, the signs of sin or the signs of age. He would place his white hands beside the coarse, bloated hands of the picture and smile. He mocked the misshapen body and the failing limbs. It's a good question here. Was Dorian, it's the nurture debate, right? Nature and nurture. Was Dorian always like this? Was he always cruel and evil? Was he fated to be so? Or was the influence of this picture and Lord Henry what caused him to be so cruel? Later on, Basil, the painter, comes by. He wants to talk to Dorian, and Dorian invites him upstairs to look at the photo, this painting of him that Basil himself painted. And Basil is horrified, rightly so. He can hardly bring himself to speak. And Dorian, furious at himself for showing the secret, and furious that Basil does not find, or does not appreciate the contrast, I guess. It's a little unclear. But in his rage, Dorian takes a knife and kills Basil. And the portrait's hands are stained red with blood. Not from, because the photo is evolving and stuff. Then using his networks of blackmail and his societal connections, he gets somebody to dispose of the body. Excuse me. And he is safe. He's not discovered. Continuing with his evils, he eventually runs into Sybil Vane's brother. And the brother, of course, he loved his sister, and so when he found out that she had essentially been killed, or at least he knew the source, he knew the name Prince Charming. It's the only way he knew Dorian. And he promised he would kill him. And so there's a little back and forth. Dorian, being the snake he is, gets out of being killed at one point. But how poetic would it be that his first sin, the thing that started this whole thing, would be the one to unravel him? I was hoping that would be the case. I thought that would be a nice way to finish the book, but not the case. Sybil's brother gets shot by accident and dies. And Dorian is, of course, overjoyed. He's safe. He's free. But he's free from that sin that's tied him down. But now he's convinced that he wants to do the right thing. He doesn't want to spoil the other people of high society anymore. He doesn't want to be that snake on people's shoulders. And so he visits a country town and he woos and seduces a young woman. But he believes himself to be more conscious now, and so he leaves her without damaging her place, her position, her status. Now, Dorian, of course, says she's nothing more than a peasant, essentially. So it wouldn't have mattered either way, but he's done it for her, he says, he's done it to protect her. And he tells all this to Henry, and Henry, I think, correctly points out that Dorian is lying to himself. He didn't do it to protect her. He didn't do it to do what's right. He did it to inflate his own ego. He did it to puff out his chest and say, I am good. I am righteous. And Dorian at first pushes back, but he comes around, and I think he realizes that what Henry has said is correct. And so one night, stewing over this, he goes up to the painting, to the photo, and he decides that I'm not exactly sure why he decides this. I suspect that's very similar to how he quote unquote spared the farm girl, where he believes that he's better, that he's more righteous, that he's almost the arbiter, in this case, of morality. I don't know if I want to say that. That sounds just like a lot of hoo-ha that doesn't mean anything. He wants to feel in control. And the photo, although it's been assisting him in skirting consequence. It's not full control. I think he despises that. He doesn't like not having that control. And so he decides to end this farce and take upon himself the sins. Why it's not exactly clear. Could it be that he wants more of a challenge? Could it be that he wants a challenge? Could it be that he wants... I suspect that he wants the world to know and to see of his successes. As horrid and vile as they might be, he wants to be recognized for what he's done. Even though he's convinced himself that he's doing it for the right reasons, he's doing it to absolve himself of this sin. And so he takes the same knife that he used to kill Basil, and he goes to stab the portrait. But instead of stabbing the portrait, because he's stabbing his own soul, he embeds the knife into his own chest. And then the switch happens, where all the sins are reflected back onto Dorian. And he ages and turns yellow and swollen, like the evils reflected on the painting. And the painting goes back to being pure, boyish, and innocent. His servants find him there, and they don't recognize him. Only by the rings and his outfit do they recognize Dorian as his true self. And then the book ends. It leaves a lot of it open to interpretation, which I love. Absolutely love it. It doesn't tell you anything. It simply examines yeah. You could equate it to Dorian's sins are a lot heavier than what most people have or experience. I don't think many of us are out killing people or blackmailing people, but the idea that the sins reflect upon us and what we have to... Are we going to conceal them? Are we going to show them? Are we going to confront them properly? How are we going to confront them? Are we going to lie to ourselves, as Dorian did? And convince ourselves that what we were doing are for others' benefit, when they're not? It's a difficult question. It's a difficult idea. I love rolling stuff like this around in my head. It's fun. You can apply it to so many things that you've done, regretted or not, that you've regretted or that you're proud of, or that... it's fun. Good stuff. I find it surprising. Well, I don't know if I should find it surprising, but I find it telling, maybe, of how topical this is. How topical the ideas that Oscar explores in his book. This is from 1891. This is not a new book. Humanity is still struggling with a lot of these same questions, a lot of these same personal tribulations that really only you yourself can answer. I thought it was a good book. How long was it? It wasn't too long. Well, just do the chapters. How many chapters were there? I think there was 20 chapters. Chapter 20... Yeah, 20 chapters. Not that long. but it can get a bit heavy at times. You might want to, like Harry Potter, you can just read back to back, but this one not so much. You might want to reflect a bit on this book. Give it a read if you're bored. I think next I might read Pride and Prejudice. I haven't really decided. Maybe Pride and Prejudice or maybe some Conan Doyle. We'll see. We'll see.